fruits. And
All right.
I'm recording.
Okay, thanks, PJ. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. I do actually have a bee in my office, of course. Just hopefully it won't be a problem, but I just want to say that in advance. There's a bee flying around my office, so hopefully it'll be all right. But if you see me screaming, that's why. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with talking about what we're going to talk about. So we are going to be looking at a lot of different berries: blueberries, blackberries, strawberries. Those three I'm going to go over a little bit more in depth. And then we're going to be looking at muscadine grapes, cranberries, hardy kiwis, honeyberries, goji berries, and a little bit about Nanking cherries. So first of all, just a general little slide about light, soil, and water requirements for growing fruit. Except for a few exceptions, most of these plants are really going to do best with full sun. So full sun is going to equal high sugar content. So the more sun you have, the more, the sweeter your berries are going to be. And then you always want to think about having well-drained soil with high organic matter. If we're growing these plants and wanting to get the produce off of them, so we really want to give them the best possible soil conditions that we can. And so generally speaking, be thinking about increasing the organic matter and making sure that you have excellent drainage. None of these berry plants are going to want to live like in a bog condition. Fertilizer is a good idea, and we'll talk a little bit more about specifics for some of the plants on when to fertilize. But again, when you're growing, you are thinking about producing large, high quality, good tasting fruit. It's important to have some kind of fertilizer regimen and be adding it occasionally throughout the year. So they are good candidates for fertilizer. And then you want to plan for irrigation. Again, in thinking about producing fruit, if you have like a drought and you don't have any irrigation set up and it happens right at the time that your fruit is ripening, that's really going to disrupt the quality of the fruit and you can potentially lose your fruit. So if you're putting in new plants or you're trying to enhance your existing plantings, thinking about how you're going to irrigate, how you're going to get water to the plants when they need them is really important. Drip irrigation is a great option, but just I don't advise planting it somewhere out just far away from the house with no plan for irrigation in case of a drought. So think about that. How are you going to get water to the plants? So the first thing that we're going to look sort of in depth at are blueberries. And these are really popular plants to grow. And they're not, I wouldn't say they're hard, but they are kind of particular. They have a few particular things that you need to keep in mind when you're growing them. And we'll talk about those. But first of all, I just want to look at some of the different types of blueberries. So rabbit eye, this type is probably the most common. And so if you go to like a big box store, or you just go somewhere to buy blueberries, chances are really good in Tennessee that it's going to be a rabbit eye type. And a few things that you need to know about rabbit eyes. One is that you do have to have two rabbit eye blueberries of a different variety in order to get cross-pollination. So you can't just stick one rabbit eye out in the landscape and get berries. You're going to have another one of the same species but a different variety that's planted about within 30 feet of that single one. So Brightwell and Premier are two varieties that I've grown successfully. And the Ocholocone and the Ozark Blue are two that are newer to me, but they were recommended by an extension agent who I know and trust, who works, for us at UT. And so I'm excited to try those. Rabbit eyes, one reason that they're so common is because they are a little bit more forgiving. So they're some of the easier ones to grow. They're a little more forgiving of pH levels and, you know, soil quality. Northern highbush is another kind that we can grow. And these are different from rabbit eye in that they are a little bit more particular about soil conditions. And they are also smaller plants. So where the rabbit eyes will get to be 12, sometimes 15 feet tall, you know, and 10 feet wide, the northern highbush and the southern highbush, they stay a little bit smaller. So they're going to be more like 5 or 6 feet tall and 5 or 6 feet wide. So that's kind of nice. And Duke and Elliott are two good varieties that I've grown. Duke is a really early fruiting type, so it comes in like in early June, and a lot of the rabbit eyes are later fruiting. So by growing different types of blueberries, you can really widen your harvest window and have, you know, fresh berries for longer across the season. Elliott is a northern highbush variety that actually fruits later in the season. And then southern highbush, we're also able to grow those. They're a little bit trickier as far as just being particular about their growing conditions. But O'Neill is a variety that was released by the USDA back in the 1980s, and it's still a really good blueberry. And it is well known for flavor. So it's got really good sweet berries. And so it's a good one to try as well. And then the last type, you know, to think about are all these new hybrids that are on the market. And these are fun because the breeders are really looking at ways to maximize the beauty of the plant as well as the edibility. And so like peach sorbet, for example, this is one I've grown at the kitchen garden, and it's just a really pretty plant. Besides the fact that you get berries off of it, it has like really beautiful fall color. It has peach colored leaves in the spring. It has pretty flowers, and then you get lovely blueberries. And then in the winter time, when all the leaves fall off, because all blueberries are deciduous, the stems of the peach sorbet and some of the other varieties are even ornamental. They are like they can be like a purple color or a red color. So you can really get a lot of ornamental appeal out of all the blueberries, but especially these new hybrids like peach sorbet and jelly bean. They've been bred to be especially ornamental. And they're also bred to be really small. So like the peach sorbet is only going to get to about 3 feet tall by 2 or 3 feet wide. So good for small spaces. So there are a lot of different kinds. As you can see, this is just a very small representation of the blueberries that are out there. There are over 200 varieties of blueberries. And Tennessee is kind of special because we're in a transition zone. So, with a little care, we are able to grow the northern types as well as the southern types. And so it's pretty cool that we are located here. And it's worth trying out some of these different varieties so that you can get different flavors, different sizes, as well as a longer harvest window. So let's look at how to grow the blueberries. So the big thing that you need to know about growing blueberries, yes?
We have a question from Cody. And the question is rabbit eye the only species that needs multiple plants for pollination?
The short answer is yes. Thank you. That's a good question.
Yes.
But a little bit longer answer is the northern highbush and the southern highbush and many of the hybrids are sold as self-pollinating. So you will get some berries with an individual plant. But the truth is it would be better to call them partially self-pollinating because you're going to get more higher quality fruit if you have another blueberry of the same species with a different variety with those northern highbush and southern highbush and the hybrids as well. So does that answer the question?
Yes, it did. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, so back to how to grow. So the big the big deal with blueberries is pH. So they want acidic soil. So most garden soil is going to be neutral, and and that's what most plants, the majority of plants, want to grow. That's what most vegetables do best in, is a neutral soil. But if you're trying to grow blueberries, you really need an acidic soil. So they want a pH of like 4.5 to 5.5. And that is actually about 100 times more acidic than your average garden soil. So we'll talk a little bit about how to acidify your soil and how to find out what your pH is in a slide coming up. But you also, you got to plan for irrigation with blueberries, and that's because they have shallow roots. They don't have a tap root. They have shallow fibrous roots that grow more towards the surface of the soil. And so they are sensitive to drying out. And so especially in the first year or two, you want to plan to have irrigation on them. They need about 1 inch of water per week during the summer. And, you know, in Tennessee, we can get some spells where the temperatures get really high. And if it's getting over 90 degrees, they may need to be watered like more than once a week, especially during that period of time when the fruit is developing. Apply mulch. This is, I tell people, you know, you want to apply mulch to probably almost every plant that you're growing in the garden, but it's really important with blueberries because they are sensitive to drying out, and they have those surface roots. They really want their roots to be kept cool and moist. And so applying a nice thick layer of organic mulch will help keep those roots happy. Sunshine. Most blueberries are going to want full sun. And again, you're going to get sweeter berries if the more sun that you have. Especially those northern high bush types, they will fruit in partial shade. And it's a decent fruit, and you'll get a decent amount of fruit, but it will be more tart. So if you want to get the sweetest possible fruit, you want to give them 6+ hours of sun. Fertilizer on blueberries. Conventional or organic fertilizer is fine. I gave these examples here, 10, 10, 10. That's just a typical conventional fertilizer that you'll see, and that just is showing that it has balanced nutrients. So this is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and it's in an equal amount distributed throughout the bag. And so that works great for blueberries. Or you might do an organic, and often those will be lower numbers. But again, you're just looking for like a balanced fertilizer. So seeing that same number across the bag, like a 444, that's is going to be sufficient and work well. Blueberries are sensitive to over fertilizing, so it's a good idea to give them a little bit at a time. You don't want to just go out and dump a ton of fertilizer on at the beginning of the growing season, because it might rain and wash away a lot of your fertilizer. The plant can only use so much at once, and B, you could risk over fertilizing the blueberry plant. So the best thing to do is apply like a little bit often. And so you want to start when the plant is actively growing, and that's when you see the green tips starting to come out in like late spring. And you can start putting on, it depends on the size of your plant and the age of your plant, but you want to think about putting small amounts on over the course of the growing season. So you might start with, you know, a cup, let's say, if you have a well-established plant, and then like a month later, you might add another application of fertilizer. And you want to continue doing that up until early July, and you want to stop fertilizing them in early July because the plants need to start to harden off for the winter. So you don't want them to be putting on a lot of lush growth late in the summer. So a little bit across the course of the growing season, frequent applications, and then stop applying in early July. And if you're growing your blueberries in containers, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, you really have to fertilize them if you want them to be productive. If you're growing them in the ground, they're going to be benefiting from some of that native natural, you know, the ambient nutrients that are probably in your native soil. But if you're growing them in a container, you really are responsible for all the nutrients that are going to be available to the plant. And so you do want to think about fertilizing them. So in thinking about pH, the best thing to do before you plant blueberries is to test your soil. And you can do that with a home testing kit. If you're just trying to figure out your pH, there are a lot of kits that are available at garden centers. And those work really well just for giving you a fairly accurate reading of what your pH is, and they'll tell you if it's, you know, if it needs to be altered. But a more in-depth thing that you can do, and something that I do recommend, is doing a lab test. And UT has a lab in Nashville, and you can go to their website, which is listed here, or you can just go to any search engine and type in UT extension soil testing, and that'll take you to their website. And it's a little, if you've never taken a soil test before, it can be a little bit intimidating, but just be patient and just look through the directions. They really spell it out for you and tell you exactly how to do it. And you send your soil to them, and there's a fee. It's like $15, but they test for pH, and you're going to get a really accurate pH reading. And they test for some of the major nutrients like phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And you can tell them what you're trying to grow. So you can tell them you want to grow blueberries, and they will give you a recommendation of what to do to your soil based on the type of plant that you're trying to grow. So that is extremely helpful. And they'll tell you the amount of amendment to add. So I do recommend doing a soil test. So if you get your soil test back and it tells you that you do need to lower your pH and make your soil more acidic, you have a couple of options. Elemental sulfur is a good one. It is an organic amendment because it's—
Question.
Oh yeah.
All right. Elizabeth wants to know, should you test several areas of potential planting areas in your residential yard? And there's another question I can answer. It says, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? We are going to upload this video probably sometime next week, either to YouTube or somewhere like that, and it will include the PowerPoint. So anyway, the other question was, should you test several areas of your yard in a residential yard?
I would say yes, especially if you're wanting to grow blueberries in one section and you're wanting to grow something else in another section. You can think about your yard in zones, and it would be good to test the different areas of the yard. And there's not like a hard, fast rule about the size to break your yard up into. But if you can break it up into maybe, like, you know, depending on the size of your yard, 3 or 4 zones, not only is that good because it will give you different recommendations based on what you're trying to grow, but also there can be a lot of variation in soil within anyone's yard. You know, it might be very different uphill or downhill, or depending on what was grown in that area before. So yeah, it's good to test for multiple spots in the yard. So let's say that that you do need to make your soil more acidic for your blueberries. The one really good option is this elemental sulfur, and that is easy to find. You can find it at farmers co-ops, or you can find it at garden centers, and it comes in a little bag. And it will give you application rates are usually listed on the back of the bag. So read the directions for that, and it will tell you how much to apply for the size of area that you're trying to amend.
Helen, we have another question.
Sure.
Sally wants to know, can you get the website for sending your soil in? I think you had that on the previous slide.
Yeah, if you want to write that down, it's here at the bottom of this slide. But like I said too, it's really easy to find. If you just go to a search engine and you just type UT extension soil test. But it's this extension.tennessee.edu Hamilton/pages/soil hyphen testing.aspx. So with this amending your soil with sulfur, the way that works is it's a process that works with the microbes in your soil. And so in order for it to work, the microbes have to be active in the soil. So you do have to amend with the soil sulfur in like when the soil is warm enough to have active microbes. So it takes a little bit of planning, but it is very effective. And then you have to wait at least 2 to 3 months. It can be as much as 6 months for that process to take effect and for the acidity to actually be, for your pH to be lowered. So it takes a little bit of planning, but it does work. And you can change the pH of your soil. You will have to do it continually. So every few years, you're going to need to add some more sulfur. And you do need to have the sulfur be in direct contact with the soil. So you really need to do it before you plant your blueberries. So you could like till up that area or dig it up with a shovel, make sure the sulfur gets really good contact with the soil, and then wait a while for it to take effect. Another option that you can do is aluminum sulfate. And this is sold as a quick acidifying amendment. And that is it's a chemical that's synthesized in a lab, so it's not organic, and it is aluminum sulfate, so it's not advisable to use this over and over a long period of time, because if you put too much of it down, it's possible you could raise the levels of aluminum in your soil. So it's something that you want to use with caution, but it's nice because it's quick. It's like basically instant. It changes the pH, but it also doesn't last as long as the soil sulfur. So keep that in mind. So you may want to ask yourself after you get your soil test and you see that it's, if you have like really neutral soil, or even if you had like basic soil, it could be that you don't want to mess around with changing the pH, or you might be like me and you forget to add more soil sulfur as time goes by. And so you just ask yourself, is it sustainable to drastically change your soil pH? Because the soil, the ambient soil, whatever the pH is, it's going to be wanting to equalize back to that ambient pH. So it's a little bit of a commitment. So I don't want to scare you off, but just keep that in mind. If you want to continue to have success, you're going to need to continue to add the sulfur. So one option, if you decide you didn't want to mess with that, is to grow blueberries in containers. And I do really like growing blueberries in containers because they have that shallow fibrous root system. They will do well in a container. You can grow them in a big old whiskey barrel. You can grow them in as big of a container as you can manage. It's going to give you the biggest, healthiest plant. But it's easy to control the pH in a container because you can use a soilless mix. So you can just use straight sphagnum peat moss and fine chipped pine bark, blend that together, and the blueberries are happy to grow in that. And because it's a smaller area, it's pretty easy to keep the pH where it needs to be. So it's a little bit easier to control the soil environment within a container, and blueberries respond well to container culture. So I made a video of me planting a blueberry in the kitchen garden. So I have really pretty expression on my face here. But we're gonna go ahead and watch this video. It's about 6 minutes long, and it just shows one method that I've learned for planting the blueberries. Hi, I'm gonna show you all a method for planting blueberries today. I'm here in the kitchen garden at UT Gardens, and we are gonna be planting this rabbit eye blueberry.
Holly, can you turn the volume up?
I'm going to use sphagnum peat moss, fine chipped pine bark, and the existing soil. Is that really hard to hear? I can't, it's as high as it will go. It's already here in the raised bed. So the first thing that you want to do is dig a nice Can y'all hear it at all? Big, wide hole. So blueberries have shallow, fibrous roots, and so what they really need is a nice, big, wide, not too deep hole. And they need to be planted a little bit high in the hole so that they will have the excellent drainage that they require. So first things first, I'm gonna dig a good hole. All right, so okay, I've got the hole finished here, and you can see that it's quite wide. It's only about 6 inches deep, but it's about a good solid 2 feet wide. So the next thing you're going to do is to blend your soil amendments with the existing native soil. I'm going to use this wheelbarrow here, and I'm going to put in most of the existing soil. And this soil has been amended with sulfur, and we did that last year in order to make the soil more acidic. First, we took a soil test, and the soil test told us that our soil was neutral. Blueberries really want acidic soil, so we've applied soil sulfur to bring the pH down to the desired range of 4.5 to 5.5. So this is one of the amendments we're going to use. This is sphagnum peat moss, and I have soaked it in water really, really well overnight, so it's nice and wet. And so the goal is to have about a third native soil or existing soil mixed with about a third of the sphagnum peat moss. And I'm just eyeballing it here. And then you're going to add about a third of this fine chip pine bark. And I use this brand, Evergreen, and it's called Soil Conditioner, but it's made of pine products. And so it's going to be naturally acidic, and this is really well composted. So I happen to know that this Evergreen brand works really well. Make sure that everything that you're adding to the hole is nice and wet. So this bag has been out in the rain, so it's good and moist in here. You can see how fine this material is, and I can smell the pine smell from it. So I know that it's a good, it's going to be a good acidic amendment. So I'm just eyeballing about another third of that. So now we got 1/3 native soil, 1/3 sphagnum peat moss, 1/3 pine chip pine bark, and I'm going to blend that all together in this wheelbarrow. Get it really nice and blended. And if it looks the least bit dry, you want to go ahead and add some more water. Because you really want to keep your roots nice and moist during the whole planting process. All right, now they're all really well blended together, and then we're going to dump some of this into the bottom of the hole. And the blueberries need really good drainage. So I'm actually going to create like a hill inside the hole. So I dump that mix in there, and I'm going to make a bit of a hill, like a mound, and I'm going to set the blueberry on top of that mound. I'm going to break the roots up some, all the way around. Make sure I get the bottom of it broken up. I'm going to set it right in the center of that hole and snug it down in there. And so the blueberry is actually sitting up out of the hole a little bit, and that's what I want. Because now I'm going to come in and mound the rest of the soil up around it so that the end result creates a small hill with the blueberry sort of at the apex of the hill. the rest of this blended soil mix. And I'm just going to pack it down around your ball. And you want to make sure you get really good soil to root contact. So this is a time when you can come in and you can actually step on it. Go all the way around the plant, pushing that soil mix down and really packing it up onto the roots of the blueberry. And then you can bring some more of the soil in. Now we go ahead and pack it down again. And that's going to get all the air pockets out. And really get the plant nice and tucked in. You want to make sure no roots are exposed. Give it a nice pat. Now I'm going to water this really well. And then I'm going to come back with a layer of mulch. And I'm going to mulch it in. And this is a 2-year-old blueberry plant. So it'll be best to get off all of the little berries and let it really just focus on growing this year. And next year, in its 3rd year, I'll be able to let it flower and make fruit. All right. Was everybody able to hear that? Sorry, the sound was kind of low.
It got better, and I think you did a really good demonstration. So yeah, people said they could hear.
Oh, good. Okay.
Besides that, you did a really good demonstration there.
Thank you. All right, so yeah, so I just wanted to demonstrate, you know, one method for planting. There's more than one right way to plant a blueberry bush, but that's one way that I have found that works really well. And just to recap, the keys there were acidify your native soil first, dig a wide, shallow hole, and amend your the backfill, amend what you're filling the hole in with sphagnum peat moss, fine chipped composted pine bark, and mix that with your native soil. And then you want your blueberry to be planted high up in the hole and make sure all your roots are really well covered up. So the next slide here just shows a mature dormant blueberry bush. And I mostly wanted to show this to look at this little graphic up in the far left part of the slide. And it shows the flower bud and a vegetative bud. And it's important to learn the difference between those, because when you go to prune, you want to know which ones are the flower buds so you don't accidentally take your flower buds off, which would take your fruit off once your plant is mature, right? And so the vegetative buds, the leaf buds are pointy, and they're usually a little bit lower on the branch. And the flower buds are going to be more towards the tip, and they're rounder. They're like little round balls. So a little bit about pruning. So I mentioned this in the video, but so when you first plant your blueberries, chances are they're going to be 1 or 2 years old. They're going to be young plants. And what you want to do is go ahead and remove any weak shoots. So if you see anything that's broken or just looks really, really skinny or weak, it's a good idea to go ahead and trim those off. And then you also want to remove your fruit buds if the plant is 1 to 2 years old, so that it can just focus on growing roots and branches for its first year. And then once the plant is about 3 years old, you can let it start to set fruit. So a little bit about pruning mature blueberry plants. Again, you always want to look for weak weak shoots, those little tiny skinny ones, you know, don't feel sorry for them and think that you should leave them on and they're going to maybe get better. You need to just take them out and let the plant focus on the really strong, healthy branches and shoots. And then you also want to think about pruning your plants to the height that you want them to be. So blueberry plants respond well to pruning. So you want to keep them about 4 to 5 feet high so you can reach the fruit. And then you also want to, once the plants get mature, you want to remove some of the old growth. So every year you can remove about, once the plants are 5 years old or older, every year you can remove about 10 to 15% of the canes per year. And you're going for those bigger, older canes. Those are going to be less productive. So you want to cut some of those out every year to encourage some new, younger, more productive canes to begin growing on. So this just shows an example, you know, of a before, and then they've come in and they've found all the dead wood and they've cut out a few of the older, less productive canes. And then on the right here, you can see after. So it's been thinned out, you've increased air circulation, you've increased your sun exposure, and the plant is ready to go for the season. And I didn't include this on a slide, but it is best to prune them when they're dormant. So you want to do it in late winter, really, really early spring is the best time for pruning. All right, so moving on from blueberries, we're going to talk a little bit about blackberries, and I am just going to focus on thornless blackberries because the flavor and sweetness of the thornless blackberries is really good. And why should you bother with messing with thorns when there are so many good thornless blackberries to choose from? In general, the plants will produce for fruit for, you know, 10 or more years. I'd say easily 10 years, probably going to go much longer if you have them in a good site. They do benefit from a little bit of fertilizer. The best time to do that is in the springtime after the dormancy is broken. And just like with the blueberries, you want to find a balanced fertilizer, and you want to just, you really only need to do like maybe one application at the beginning of the season with blackberries. And honestly, I don't fertilize my blackberries at UT Gardens, and they do just fine. So if you have a good site and your blackberries look really vigorous and healthy, you may not even need to give them any fertilizer. But if you just really want to baby them and give them an extra boost, you can do that as well. A couple of favorite cultivars of mine are Navajo and Triple Crown. And I would say Triple Crown is my #1 favorite. And that is just because I know it's personal, but the flavor is there for me. Those are like the sweetest, most flavorful, best tasting blackberries in my opinion. So I love Triple Crown. And Navajo is a really good variety as well. It came out of the University of Arkansas, and it's a more upright variety. All of the blackberries are going to do best with some kind of support system. So if you have a fence to grow them up against, or you have some kind of trellising system, it's going to make it easier for you to access the fruit, and it's going to keep the canes up off the ground, which will help keep down disease, and it will keep the berries from laying on the ground, which might cause them to rot. So it's a good idea to think about some kind of support system for your blackberries. So you can see here at the bottom, the different varieties have different growth habits. So some are more erect, the canes are stiffer and they'll stand pretty well upright. And then you've got semi-erect, and then you got the straight up trailing varieties. So it's a good idea when you're thinking about how you're going to support them to understand what is the natural habit of the cultivar variety that you've chosen, and then you can choose the best support system that'll work well with its growth habit. So this here on the right is just showing, this is like a pretty typical trellis system that's used for blackberries and raspberries, and you just grow them up in between the 2 wires, and that keeps them standing upright. At UT Gardens, I have metal fencing, and it's like animal fencing. It's called hog panels, and it's steel squares basically, and I'm able to train the blackberry canes onto those, and it just keeps them upright. So you can get creative with trellising, but do think about some way to support your canes. A little bit about blackberry vocabulary. So the deal with blackberries is they are perennial plants, which means they come back year after year, with biennial canes. And biennial canes means the cane comes up the first year and grows its leaves and puts on, the stem grows up with just leaves, and then it overwinters, and the next year that same cane will flower and set fruit and die. And so over the course of the life of the cane, it's going to have two different names. So the first year, when it first comes out of the ground, it's called a primocane. And then after it's overwintered, and it's going to be fruiting the following year, it's now called a floricane. And so floricanes are the 2-year-old canes that are going to flower, they're going to set fruit, and then they're going to turn brown and dry, and they're going to die back. And that's okay, that's normal. And you want to just cut those dead canes out and let your next cycle of growth come on, and you'll see some new primocanes shooting up. They will have grown up by the time you're cutting out your old previously fruited floricanes. So this is a great pictograph that I got from David Lockwood, and this shows just the process of pruning. So up here at the very top, you can see where it says the summer. And so what you're going to be doing in the summer is topping your canes. So some of these blackberries can grow 10, 20 feet long if you don't cut them back. But if you cut the tops off of them at the height that you want them to be, you're going to keep them at a manageable size for harvesting. And you're going to stiffen that main cane. So when you cut the top off of it, that main cane stiffens, and that helps it stand up straight. And then you're just going to let the lateral branches, the little branches that come off the side of that main cane, you're going to let them grow throughout the summer. And that is where the fruit is going to be eventually. And then once they start to go dormant in the wintertime, you're going to cut those laterals off. You're going to cut them down to about 12 to 18 inches long, and you're going to thin them out. So you've got your main central stiff cane, and then you've got the lateral branches coming off, and you're going to shorten those lateral branches, and that's going to be where your fruit develops. And you want to thin them out a little bit just so you can have a few selected really healthy canes with really healthy lateral branches, and that's going to give you the biggest, best quality fruit. And then going on into the next season, those floricanes, again, those are going to fruit, and then they're going to die. And so you want to cut them back as soon as they die and get them out of there, just to keep your patch clean and to keep to be able to kind of see what's going on and to keep diseases down. So go ahead and cut down your old fruited floricanes and get them out, get them to the compost pile. Just an interesting thing here, there has been some breeding where they have come out with Primocane-bearing blackberries. And so these are cool because the pruning is not as complicated, because they will set fruit on that first year, the first year's growth. And so with this one, you just allow them to grow up, they make fruit, you cut all of them down to the ground in the in late winter, and then you just start the cycle over again. You do have to do some thinning with those, but it's nice because all the fruit happens on that first year's growth, so it's kind of simplifies things. There's a variety called Prime Arc Freedom, and that is a primocane-bearing thornless blackberry. Again, this is just my opinion, but to the primocane-bearing crops that I've tried, the berry quality wasn't quite as good. So I think they need to do some more breeding to get sweeter, more flavorful berries. But something to keep an eye out for and just think about for a different pruning regimen. So just one note about pruning out those floricanes. When you're cutting them down, and if you're pruning out the spindly primicanes or the spent floricanes, you want to cut them all the way down to the ground. So if you leave these stubs sticking out of the ground, like you can see in the top picture, if it's a primicane and you leave those little stubs, you might get side lateral branches that come out, and then you're just going to be producing fruit that's going to be down on the ground, and it's going to be robbing energy from those other more desirable canes and fruiting structures. So you really want to get them cut all the way down to the base of the ground, and that's also going to minimize any entry point for disease that might cause problems later. Okay, so I thought we could just take a short little break here. Everybody can stretch, take a drink of water, whatever you need to do. So we'll break for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and keep going. And if anybody has questions now during the break, I'd be happy to answer questions.
We do have a break question, Holly. Mm-hmm. Will blackberry plants purchased at a big box store nursery like Lowe's have mostly primicanes or floricanes? Should we worry about pruning right away?
You'll be able to tell if it's a primicane or a floricane by what it does. So if you buy it and the canes have flowers on them, you know that is a floricane, right? If you buy it and you don't see any flowers or fruit on there in that first year, that's a primicane. My short answer would be, it depends on, I would have to, it kind of depends on what the plant looks like. If the plant looks like really healthy and you have a lot of different shoots coming off of it, I think it would be a good idea to choose the main healthiest shoots and do a little bit of pruning, especially if you see something that's really spindly, regardless of whether it's a floricane or a primicane. But if you only have 1 or 2 shoots on there, I would just let it grow and see what those shoots do. And they're pretty vigorous, so you're probably good no matter what, as long as you got a healthy plant to start with. So yeah, that's kind of a roundabout answer, but it's just, I wouldn't know exactly what you'd be buying, so you just have to kind of try to figure it out. Is it a floricane or a primicane? Probably you're going to want to just not prune for the first year, see what those canes do, and then you'll be able to determine what kind of pruning you should do going forward, if that makes sense.
Okay, so we're still on our 5-minute break. We got 3 or 4 minutes left.
Okay.
And then we'll come back.
Yeah, I didn't really think about the recording during the 5-minute break.
I'm still recording. Do you want me to turn it off? Do you want me to pause it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, let's do that. And then you just turn it back on. Where's my... Here we go. All right, so there are a few different types of strawberries, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm just going to talk about 2 main types, and those are June-bearing strawberries, and this is one of the more traditional types of strawberry. And with June-bearing, the deal is you get 1 large crop once in the year, and so they are called June-bearing, but here in Tennessee, that big crop usually comes in late May, although it really just depends on what the season does, because I've got some berries starting to ripen in the kitchen garden right now, so I think we're going to have a really early crop this year. But one good variety of June-bearing is Early Glow. That's one that I've grown successfully at the gardens, and it's one that's recommended by UT Extension. So that's a good one to try. And then the other main type of strawberries we're going to talk about today are day neutral. And so these are not sensitive to day length. And so they will produce a little bit of strawberries all across the growing season. And two nice varieties of day neutral strawberries are Ozark Beauty and Seascape. And these are great for, you know, if you just want a few fresh berries and you want them to be extended across the season. If you're wanting to do more like canning, or you want to freeze a large amount of strawberries, then the June bearing is what you want to look into. If you order bare root strawberries, that is a great way, a great inexpensive way to get some nice varieties. This is what they're going to look like. You can see this clump in my hand here. And you do want to plant them really soon after you get them, because they are bare root, so those roots are going to be sensitive. You got to keep them moist, and it's a good idea to actually soak them in a pot of water, you know, as you're planting them, so that you make sure that they stay really nice and wet the whole time. And then you're going to put them in a nice hole with good, you know, good rich garden soil. And you want to make sure that the roots are spread out really well in the hole, and that they're not bent or crimped in any way. And you want to make sure that that the soil is in contact with the roots all the way around. So this is like the beginning of planting here on the right, and then obviously you would fill that in with soil, tamp it down, and water it really well. So you always see these graphs when you're looking at bare root strawberry plants. They talk about the depth of the planting, and it's really important not to plant them too deep. So if you see example A here, that is like the ideal way to plant them. So the roots are really nice and spread out, and the plant is planted this little growing structure right here, the crown. You don't want to have that planted too deep. So example B shows that the crown is planted too deep, and that could cause rotting. Example C, you see that the plant is planted too high. So you can see those roots are sticking out of the ground. Those are going to dry out, and the plant's going to be compromised. And then example D, what this is showing is that the hole was not dug deep enough, and the roots were not spread out, so they just smashed the roots down into the hole, and that's not going to get your strawberry off to a good start. So you want to make sure to do it like example A. You got the roots nicely spread out, and you have the crown of the plant well above the soil line. Spacing, you can go as close as 8 inches, but you know, an average, something around about a 12-inch spacing, 1 foot spacing is ideal for most strawberries. And as far as fertilizing goes, it's different for June bearing versus day neutral. With the June bearing strawberries, you want to fertilize them once after you've harvested. So after that big harvest comes in, you want to clean the berries out, clean out all the dead leaves. If you have a really well established strawberry bed, you want to pull out some of those older plants. And most of you all have probably seen how the strawberries will make runners, and they'll make new baby plants. So you want to think about making those new baby plants be your future producers, and you want to pull out some of those older, more woody plants, because they're going to become less productive over time. But back to fertilizing with the everbearing and the day neutral, you want to just fertilize once midsummer with a general all-purpose fertilizer. Don't over-fertilize your strawberries, because you can get softer berries, and that can lead to more disease problems. So it is good to put a little bit of fertilizer down, but you do want to do it at the right time, and you want to do the right amount. So don't just pour too much on there. There you go. Do not over fertilize. So you can do them in straight rows, but you can also get creative with your strawberry planting. They work great as a ground cover. At UT Gardens, I just grow them as a ground cover in some of my flower beds, and they just kind of go wild, and I don't get like a ton of berries out of there, but I get enough that it's nice to have a few berries. and they kind of spread and cover the ground really well. So it's an ornamental and edible ground cover to try. And then you can do them in hanging pots. They're really great for containers. And you can get these cool planting pyramids. So you can really get creative with strawberry planting. This white berry is called pineberry. And this is a type of strawberry that tastes, I don't know, they say it tastes a little bit like pineapple. Definitely it tastes a little different from your standard strawberry, and it's a really mild, really sweet, yummy flavor. And so that's, I don't think it's new to the market, but I think it's been newly branded. So that's one to try that's just a little bit different. I've been growing that for about 3 years in the kitchen garden, and it's coming back strong every year. And I haven't seen a lot of disease on it, not a lot of fungus. So it seems to be a really a good choice to grow. And then this pink flower is showing some of these new ornamental strawberries that are coming out. These are ornamental and edible, and they have really sweet, pretty flowers. They come in a pale pink, they come in this nice, rich, darker pink, and almost a red color. And the berries on them they're a decent strawberry. And it's fun because they're really pretty to look at, and you get a sweet little edible strawberry. So this one in particular that I have on this slide is called Buried Treasure, and that's a Proven Winners strawberry. It's new to the market over the last couple years. So large-scale growers, they grow strawberries not as a perennial plant, but they just grow it as an annual. And that's because strawberries do have quite a lot of diseases and pest pressures. Slugs and snails can be an issue with the strawberries. So they can be a little bit frustrating to grow, but when you do, if you're able, when you get those nice fresh strawberries straight out of your garden that are sun warmed, they're so delicious. So I think it's really worth it to give it a try, and know that anything you get is a bonus. And if you want to really produce a lot and get serious about it, you should study the way the commercial farmers do it and maybe think about mimicking their methods. They use black plastic as a mulch, and they replant their strawberries every year in order to ensure that they have disease-free plants. And then just one note on those pests that I mentioned, birds, you can do netting, or what I like to do is just grow a lot of strawberries, and I feel like then I get some and the birds get some and everything's okay. Snails and slugs can be a problem, and I use there is a natural bait, and I did not have this written down, I apologize, but I know it's iron phosphate, and so it's non-toxic to pests, non-toxic to people, and it's a little pelleted product that you just put down in the strawberry beds, and the snails and slugs are more attracted to it than they are to the berries, and they eat that and they die. So there are some good organic applications that you can use to control the slugs and snails. And cleaning your strawberry beds out, pulling out those old plants like I mentioned, and pulling off the old leaves that look a little bit funky and keeping some good air circulation in there is a good idea to help fight disease. And it will also help to create an environment that's less attractive to those slugs and snails. So keep them cleaned out. So moving on to Muscadine grapes. These are a Southern classic, Southern delight. They are native to Tennessee and other parts of the Southeast. And so that to me is a good indication of how they're going to perform, right? They grow wild in the woods, so probably they're going to grow good for us in our gardens. They are vigorous vines that do require training. You do need to have some kind of trellis or something to grow them on. You do need, there are hundreds of varieties of muscadines that you can choose from, and there are self-fruitful ones that do not need another female or a male close by to cross-pollinate. You can get the self-fertile types. But if you do get a kind that needs a cross-pollinator, then you need to get a male and a female growing nearby. These are great because you don't have to spray them, right? So I used to grow table grapes in the kitchen garden, and those were delicious and beautiful, but there's no table grape that I'm aware of that you can grow in Tennessee without using some kind of fungicide. And there are organic fungicides that you can use, but for me, it just came down to the time factor. Do you want to invest the time of spraying the grapes? And so muscadines, they're hardy. They don't have a lot of pests and diseases, so you don't have to spray them. So that's really nice. We are at the northern end of the range for muscadines. So that means that it's too cold for them much north of here. And so, and also they have a long ripening window. Some of them do. So you want to look at the description of your muscadine and try to choose a variety that ripens early. Because when our winter comes on, sometimes we'll get really cold temperatures like as early as October. And if you chose a variety that has a long ripening time, it may not have had a chance to get ripe yet by the time winter sets in. So look for those early maturing varieties. A couple of favorite muscadine cultivars that I've grown and eaten are Early Fry, Ison, and Darlene. Those have all done really well for me. And I'm not going to go too in depth with muscadine pruning, but basically what I want to show you here is on the left side of this slide, you can see before pruning, and you can see they grow like crazy. They've got all these little side branches coming off of here. And the main thing that you want to think about doing is thinning those out. So you want to thin out the side branches, take out about 30 to 50% of those little branches all the way down to the main vine. And then you want to shorten the branches that you've left behind. So you can see on the right here, that's kind of what you're going for with the after. So you've cleared out space in between the fruiting structures, and you've shortened those little branches down. So you're going to get bigger fruit, and you're going to have good air circulation in between your clusters. So cranberries, these are wonderful to grow. They do not require a bog. They're grown. They are grown, you see those pictures where they've flooded the fields and all the cranberries have risen to the top of the water. And that is just a harvesting technique. So they flood the fields, and the cranberries are hollow, and so they float to the top. So that's how they harvest them, but they don't actually need to grow in a bog. There are cranberries that are native to some of the mountainous regions of North Carolina and Tennessee. They are another one that likes low pH, and they can benefit from some afternoon shade. So the ones that are native to Tennessee, they grow like in the woods and the mountains. But this is a nice one to grow with blueberries, because if you're already amending your soil for blueberry production, you can stick in some cranberries as well, and you can get both types of berries for your labor. They are self-pollinating, and so you don't need two different varieties. They work great in containers. They'll spill over the edge of the container, and they're really pretty. They are actually evergreen, and they have tiny little leaves that turn like a purplish color in the wintertime, and so they're just a really attractive little plant. You have to grow a lot of cranberries if you want like a ton, like enough to make cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving. But if you want to grow them just for fun, just for interest, and maybe to add to smoothies, they're a great source of vitamin C, and they're pretty easy to grow. My favorite cultivar is one called Stevens, and the cranberries are susceptible to some fungal diseases, and so Stevens is a good one because it seems to be pretty productive without needing to be sprayed with any fungicides. And like I said, they grow well with other acid-tolerant plants. Hardy kiwi, this is one that I'm very excited about, and we are growing this at the UT Kitchen Garden, and if you're able to get out sometime soon, please come and check them out, because they're just starting to flower right now. They're on the main arbor in the center of the kitchen garden, and they're a really beautiful, vigorous vine. They do require cross-pollination. There is one variety out there that is sold as self-pollinating, but from everything I've read and everyone I've talked to, it doesn't produce a lot of fruit. So if you really want to get good fruit production, you need to have at least one male for every 9 females. And these are a bit of an investment of time because they do take about 4 years until you get fruit. But once you get them going, they can live for 50 or more years. They can be really long-lived. And like I said, they are a vigorous vine. They can grow, 40, 60 feet long. So you really need to have a large, sturdy structure to grow them on. But they provide nice shade in the summertime. They have beautiful large leaves, and they fruit late in the season. So it's pretty nice because when a lot of things have already passed and you've finished a lot of your fruit harvest, the hardy kiwis come on and they kind of fill in that later season gap. They do need ample water and well-drained soil to avoid root rot. So they want to be in full sun, and they want their roots to be protected and moist but well-drained soil.
Holly, we have a question. Edward is asking, does growing raspberries and blackberries near each other present problems?
Yes, the recommendation is that you should not plant blackberries and raspberries within, I want to say 30 feet of each other, and it may be as much as 50 feet. It's because they do share some diseases, and so you may get a disease in your raspberries, and if you have your blackberries planted too close by, then they could both fall under and be affected by a disease. I will say that I break the rules at UT Gardens, and I'm growing blackberries and raspberries, and they are closer than 30 feet. And I'm not going to, promise you anything, but I'm going on 7 years, and so far I haven't had a problem. So if you want to be totally safe, don't do it. But if you want to hedge your bets and gamble a little bit, you could try. So moving on here, I think this is the next to last berry, honeyberries. This one's a little less common, but it's a good one to try. It's native to Japan and Russia, and it requires afternoon shade, and it will grow in full shade. So it's pretty special because it is a berry that will produce edible, palatable berries in full shade. So it's pretty neat in that way. And it doesn't have any specific soil requirements, so it'll grow in all types of soil. They do require cross-pollination, so you need to have 2 different varieties growing close enough that a bee would fly between the 2 plants to do the cross-pollination. A couple of variety names that I've grown are Blue Moon and Blue Velvet. When you're looking at honeyberry varieties, you want to look for the key descriptor is that it's going to be a late flowering one, because we tend to have late frosts and late freezes in Tennessee. These tend to be early flowering, early producing berries, and so some of the varieties flower a little bit later. And the later flowering varieties, you're going to have a better chance of avoiding those late killing frosts. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at honeyberries. The flavor is, I'm going to be honest with you, it's not as good as a blueberry, but it's has great antioxidants, and people say that it tastes a little bit like maybe a blend between a blueberry and a raspberry. But it's so cool because it grows in the shade, and it's really easy to grow, and it fruits pretty early, and it's one that you could maybe add to a mixed berry situation, and it would just add some flavor and some antioxidants and a different type of berry to the mix. And then goji berries are one that I've been growing now for a few years. These are most commonly found as dried fruit, and you may have seen them as wolfberries in health food stores. but they're pretty good fresh. They're really easy to grow, and they're in the tomato family. They are tolerant of poor soil, which is a plus for them. They're not picky about soil. They are self-pollinating, so that makes them pretty easy. This is another one that has a late harvest, so that's cool because, again, a lot of your other fruits will be done coming in, but this later in the season, you can enjoy goji berries. They spread by runner, and so like I put one shrub in a raised bed at UT Gardens, and I now have like 4 shrubs in that bed, so they really do spread by runner, so that's something to keep in mind when you're siting them. They are a bit of an acquired taste. They're pretty tart, but again, they are so easy to grow, and they have a lot of health benefits that I recommend, trying them. If you dehydrate them, like if you have a dehydrator, or you can dry them out in your oven, that will concentrate the sugar in them and make them a little bit sweeter. Nanking cherry, this is my last plant for the day, and this is one that I'm pretty excited about. It's fruiting. It takes a couple years for it to start fruiting, but I have 2 shrubs at UT Gardens that are about 4 or 5 years old now, and they're starting to fruit really well. So it's an easy to grow, large shrub. You do have to have 2 for cross-pollination, and they do need really good full sun, and the cherries come on in early summer, and they're like a tart pie cherry. They have a really good flavor. They're pretty small, but they're definitely big enough that if you pick a big handful of them or pick a nice bucket full of them, you'll get a nice little meal. So they're really tasty and really easy to grow. And they have early spring interest. These are one that blooms very, very early, and they're beautiful. The whole shrub lights up with pink white flowers, and they're really attractive to look at. And they're nice because they provide food for early foraging honeybees. So they're blooming when some other things have not started blooming yet. And you often see hungry honeybees out looking for forage early in the spring. And I always see tons of the honeybees in my Nanking cherries. So they're a really fun one to try. And if you come by the gardens this year in early summer, I'll let you pick some off of my berry bushes and you can try some. They're really tasty.
Holly, we have a question.
Yes.
Does the goji berry require full sun?
Yes, they are going to do best with full sun.
Okay. Okay.
So a couple of resources. I like to recommend the local garden centers, and they are a really good resource, all of your local garden centers. But a lot of these berries are also, it's good to get them from some of these established mail order places. Norse Farms is one that I've used with good results. One Green World is interesting in that they have a lot of the more the less common fruits. So if you're looking for something that's harder to find, they're a good one to try. And then Ison's, they're in Georgia, I believe, and they specialize in muscadines. So if you want muscadine grapes, that's a great source to go to. I think they have like hundreds of different types of muscadines, and they actually do some breeding there as well. So they have a beautiful catalog, so you can try them out. One other good resource for plants is UT Gardens. So we just happen to be having a plant sale right now. It is a no contact version of our spring plant sale, and it is going to be going on through April 27th. We're going to do a no contact pickup day on May 1st at UT Gardens, and but you can go online and order right now. We do have blackberries. We've got some raspberries on there. We've got 4 different types of blueberries, and I chose the blueberry varieties this year, and I purposefully tried to choose some of the different ones that you don't normally see at the big box stores if you want to branch out and try some of those earlier fruiting northern high bush types. We have those available. And we also have figs. There are 3 different types of figs in there. So please check out the plant sale. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm happy to take questions. And if you have any other questions at any time, you're welcome to email me. My email address is here. And please come visit me in the gardens as soon as you can get out and about again.
Okay, thanks everyone. Like I said at the first, we've recorded this and we'll get it posted sometime next week. And you'll probably see a notice on Facebook or somewhere like that. So you can watch it again. Does anybody have any last questions? If you do, just type it in on the chat. Well, everybody seems to be okay, Holly. So I'm going to stop the recording and hope to see you all again.
All right. Thanks, PJ.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody.